You are listening to episode 100 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Filmmaker Max Pugh joins us to speak about Walk With Me, a film about mindfulness with Thich Nhat Hanh. Many of the mindfulness teachers in the West, whether first generation, Gen X, millennials, or whatever is most current, got their start on the contemplative path from various traditional settings. One of the most well-known and loved is Plum Village in France, and its founder, Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich suffered a stroke in recent years, and though he's doing well, is no longer able to teach as he has over the years. So it's very fortunate offering to the world to have a film about the practice, the village, and the monk. Max Pugh is a Franco-British feature documentary and fiction film director who has also gained critical acclaim worldwide for his video art and installation work with composer and filmmaker Michael Nyman. His latest film, Walk With Me, is co-directed and co-produced with Mark J. Francis and opens worldwide in autumn 2017. Our guest today is Max Pugh. Max, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here, Ted.
Very glad to have you, especially talking about such a wonderful topic, and we'll dive into that in a moment. But first, why don't you tell us a bit about your background as a filmmaker?
So I'm mostly a documentary maker, but I also make some fiction movies, and I do a lot of work in art installation world as well. So across three quite different genres. On this film, I worked with my great friend and colleague Mark Francis, who's also a filmmaker. I've been working with him for about 15 years now.
So there's a personal story about how you got involved with this project and close ties to your family. If you'd be willing to share a bit about that.
Yes, of course. My younger brother, who's 2.5 years younger than me, ordained to become monastic in Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village community in 2008. And when he ordained, I was at the ceremony and found that very moving. I thought it was a very radical life choice. And the first thing that occurred to me during that ceremony was to tell the story as a fiction film, to write his story as a script, because the documentary was already happening in front of me and I didn't have a camera. I was kind of too late to the party. But it also gave me pause to think that actually making any film project, whether it's documentary or fiction, about his transformation and his life would probably block his practice. It instinctively felt like the wrong thing to do, to put a camera in the way. And so I just let that idea go. And lo and behold, in 2011, 3 years later, my brother and one of the elder monastics from the community, brother Pugh, came to me at the Lunar New Year celebrations in February of that year in France and said, would you make a documentary about our community? I think we're ready for it. And they had a treatment already. They said, what about a road movie about us on tour in the US? And Thich Pugh said, and I'll never forget this, he said, like a rock band movie, but with no sex and no drugs. And so I couldn't resist. I thought that was the most incredible proposal. I thought it was very provocative and very interesting because personally, and I think Mark would back me up in saying this, there's nothing, we certainly didn't want to make a Dharma film. You know, many movies about Buddhist subject matters are, in my experience, actually quite dull and, you know, full of quite predictable imagery. And I'm sure that we've quoted some of that imagery in Walk With Me. I'm not saying that we've reinvented the wheel, but we did very much want to feel that we were challenging the subject matter as outside filmmakers and really not somehow just creating a sort of tool of propaganda for a community of any sort. Even though my brother was one of the monastics, as a filmmaker, I couldn't allow myself to make what other people might term a sort of corporate film. We had to really always remember that we're looking at this from the outside and challenge the subject matter.
You had noted when we started talking that you didn't want the camera in the way of your brother's development. If we can just stick with that for a moment, was he on the trip that you took during filming?
Yes, he was. But one of the ways that we avoided, he was certainly on the first trip, one of the ways that we avoided making him too full frontal, turning him into a star, is just by making sure that we also had 5 or 6 other characters at all times that we were following. So it wasn't that we were ignoring him or allowing him to hide in the shadows. He was happy to be on film. It's just he was happier, more comfortable to be represented as part of a community, so with others.
So I'm curious. This is with someone that you are so very close to, and wondering what if that was difficult for you, balancing this, seeing someone that you're personally close to, and they are a part of this, and granted, taking an appropriate, I'm one of a few here. This is not about me. Still, was it challenging for you sometimes to balance that? I am the filmmaker here, and I'm also observing this amazing situation for someone I love. What was that like for you?
Yes, it brought up many questions, but I think that the sort of ethical problem that you might assume would occur, actually, I always felt was a sort of ethical solution in a way. I always saw it as a very positive thing that I really had to deeply respect his choice, whilst also making sure that I could see it and challenge it as an outsider, as I was saying earlier. But could the result be actually a film which is made lovingly or from a perspective of love and not a perspective of sort of typical challenge? And typical challenges in documentary filmmaking tradition is often quite aggressive and often quite well, discursive is one way of putting it, but polemical. And I thought, well, you know, let's try not to make this a polemic. Let's try and look at this community. Let's try and reciprocate the love that they're giving us, give that back to them, and then see what happens. And what happened was the most incredible journey of discovery of the subject matter, of self-discovery for us as filmmakers. And it was a genuinely beautiful experience, and it may not happen again. And certainly Mark and I had to pinch ourselves a few times on the filming trips and just say it may never get as good as this, as being in beautiful situations with people who love us, who we love, who we've built a very close relationship to, and yet still feel we're challenging our form, challenging the form of cinema, the language of cinema, developing a language specifically to tell this story, and not being complacent in any way as artists or filmmakers, but really challenging ourselves in the subject matter, but still doing it in such a beautiful, harmonious way, instead of a sort of combative way. So I think the relationship between my brother and I was probably the reason why all of that remained true right to the end.
So we already know just from this little bit of discussion that the process was this was a trip, perhaps a couple of trips. And I'm wondering if you could maybe paint that picture a little more clearly for those who aren't as aware of the background of it. What?
Yeah, it was certainly more than two trips, even. It was nine. I think we filmed for 8 weeks in 2011, and then we came back and we looked at our material. Those 8 weeks were from Canada right through the US, ending in California, going to all of the Plum Village practice centers. And then in 2012, we looked back at that material and decided to start filming in France, which obviously easier for us to get to. So we then went to film certain key moments in the year in 2012, just for a few days here and there. And then we said, okay, but a big part of this film is going to have to be the on tour, as the original concept I described. And so we decided to join them on the second US tour in the summer, fall of 2013. And that's really where we managed to complete the circle. So we really filmed it in 2011, 2012, 2013. And then maybe we did a couple of pickups in France in 2014, but again, a couple of days. And then we really started editing. And by the fall of 2014, the film was basically taking shape. And of course, that's the point where the subject matter, not the literal subject matter, but certainly the heart of the subject matter, Thich Nhat Hanh himself, then suffered a stroke in November 2014. And by then, we had actually finished filming. So it was then just a question of editing. So really, I think it can't have been far from the minds of the community when they asked us to make the film that he was getting very, very old and that he wouldn't be around forever. Of course, nobody is. And in fact, I think everybody's incredibly thankful that he's still alive, and amazed, actually. He's defied most medical opinion by remaining alive. But of course, he has lost the power of speech and the ability to write. So he's certainly taken a step back from the public life that he used to lead.
So we'll come back to that because I want to explore it a bit more about how that influenced things when that happened. But I want to ask a little bit about how Walk With Me is a bit different than your other work.
Yes, it's a non-narrative film, so it doesn't have a typical predictable, well, not predictable, but certainly a conventional story. It has it's a sequence of present moments. So the reason why that came about was that Thich Nhat Hanh himself challenged us when we started the film with the idea of turning movie theaters into meditation halls. Can you do it? Mm-hmm. And we really enjoyed responding to that with sound and with picture. And one of the ways that we thought we could do that was by sequencing, observing, allowing us to receive the present moment in the field, and then sequencing those present moments on a convincing journey, but not a story as such. The way we structured the journey is through the seasons. So there is a sort of a form to the year, a form to the journey we're on, but it's not what we would call a conventional story. And in comparison to the previous work that I've done, certainly the last feature film I did had a narrator. It had a famous actor telling you where you are in the story, the state of the characters on the particular journey they take through 2 African countries in that case. And in Walk With Me, we wanted very much to leave that style behind and to immerse. So we wanted to create a kind of language of immersive cinema, which we felt would be more in tune with the subject matter. So we were touched by the experience of going on a retreat with Plum Village, and we thought, well, maybe we can give that experience through sound and picture, take you there, and then that would also respond to Thich Nhat Hanh's own sort of creative challenge or aspiration to turn the movie theatre into a meditation hall. Mm-hmm. So that's in the main how it differed from previous work that I had done, and indeed previous work that Mark had done as well.
It sounds much more directly experiential for those that would be watching the film in a theater.
Exactly.
So, as we mentioned, after you finished filming, and as many of the listeners to this podcast are well aware, Thich Nhat Hanh suffered a stroke. And I'm wondering how that influenced what you wanted to make happen with the film.
Well, interestingly, it didn't influence things at all, I think, because we had already decided, partly through conversations with Ty himself, that it wasn't going to be about him, that it wasn't a biographical film that carried information about his life. It's the last thing he wanted. He said anybody can find that information online or reading his books. It was more, can you actually make this film about community? Can you show the brothers and sisters, my students? And so we had already basically set that in motion, or we had finished filming by then, and we had what we thought we needed. And neither Mark nor I ever wanted to go and interview Thich Nhat Hanh, for instance. It just didn't seem a useful sort of use of our time, because Thich Nhat Hanh has been interviewed before. We wanted to go much deeper than that. Try and film moments, get access to areas of life and parts of the community that the cameras hadn't been allowed to up till now. And so, really, I don't think it influenced the filmmaking at all. Now, of course, is the fact that, he's now retired from public life and then the film comes out, has this made people more desiring to go and see the film because they feel that they will somehow get back into contact with Thich Nhat Hanh if they knew him before, or to somehow touch him if they didn't? Then I would say that's probably had a powerful effect on the release of the film. Perhaps there are countries who've taken it who weren't going to before. Maybe it's in more movie theaters than it was going to be into, because people feel that they want more of Thich Nhat Hanh now. But I think that can only be a good thing, frankly. And even though, of course, the film doesn't tell Ty's story directly, it does feature him very much. He's the kind of meta sort of story. He's the backbone of the film in a way, and Benedict Cumberbatch's narrations are in Ty's voice from his book Fragrant Palm Leaves, and you see Thich Nhat Hanh at several important moments in the film. And of course, in one scene, he does actually give a moment of a powerful Dharma talk about evoking the present moment. Mm-hmm. So anybody who feels that they don't know Thich Nhat Hanh and want to discover him, I would hope would feel satisfied by the film. Mm-hmm. But of course, if they then want to find out biographical information, I would urge them to, look up Wikipedia afterwards rather than expect the film to convey that information.
Yeah. Max, how about for you personally? What did you learn during filming, or what was most moving to you as you were making this film?
Well, I certainly got to spend more time with my brother than I had done in the 20 previous years, and that can only be a kind of blessing and a privilege. And the other thing was practice by osmosis, if you like, because I certainly don't call myself a practitioner now, and even less before I started the process. But as a filmmaker, I have to stop and I have to listen, and I have to allow the subject matter, whatever it is, to speak to me and be receptive to it without coloring it, without interpreting it. Just allow that to be transmitted. And of course, here the subject matter itself was about those things that I've just described. And so in a way, it's a sort of magic meeting of receptiveness and transmission. And so by allowing myself to kind of sit and listen and observe, I was then learning something myself. And that felt very good. It felt very good because then it had unforeseen consequences for me about kind of calming the mind, about increasing my focus, and dealing with sort of frustration or irritation or even anger and things that I didn't have tools for before. I now genuinely feel that I do have tools for. And it was unthinkable for me to for instance, to think or to speak about a subject matter such as vegetarianism before, whereas now I'm convinced. The things like that are certainly they as they say, a kind of an expanded mind never returns to its former size. I certainly feel that way about my contact with the practice. I don't see myself going backwards now, only forwards.
What else would you like to share with the listeners?
I think to remember Thich Nhat Hanh's own aspiration about question whether movie theaters could become meditation halls, and just for once, just try and sit and receive a film in a different way to kind of general entertainment, and really use the time and the space in self-reflection, because what we try and create is an opportunity for you to join a meditation. I'm glad to say that the film has been received as entertaining. The people laugh and they cry right the way through, and I've been in enough screenings in film festivals and in premieres to see this huge packed theaters full of people responding in a kind of communal, synchronous way is very exciting, very moving for us as filmmakers. So we're certainly not saying that it isn't entertaining. It is, but just to try and open yourself and to receive it directly and differently, to give yourself to the film, because then you won't be disappointed by the fact that there isn't a kind of dramatic story, that different things will happen to you as a viewer, and through those different things, hopefully, it will make you think differently about yourself and your own life, and give you an insight into a very rare and radical thing, which is the commitment to the ordination of a monk or a nun.
Beautifully said. So for those who are listening, I'll have links to a few different places on the episode page for this episode. walkwithmefilm.com, as well as maxpugh.com, that's P-U-G-H, and speakit.org. Our guest today, Max Pugh. Max, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ted. It was wonderful.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.